Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Just Talking About Sports. I'm Ethan.
I'm Drew.
And Drew, what are we doing today?
We're just talking about sports. I know, not as much enthusiasm, but don't worry, I'm saving that for later.
Yes. All right. And in today's episode, today we're going to be covering, for the first time in this channel, believe it or not, college football. As we haven't been, at least me and Matt aren't as big as fans of college football, but we have Drew here, and he is one of the bigger fans of college football that I know of, and we know of. So he said he wanted to create a video, so we said might as well do it. And since it's getting into the more intense and basically the more hype part of college football, because this week we have the conference championships this weekend on Friday and Saturday for basically almost some of the bigger like Power 5 divisions and even some of the smaller ones that we'll get into later in this video. But for now, we're just going to be kind of doing a quick brief review, or basically just run through of the college football rankings. So without further ado, we'll just start looking at the top 25 teams that we have right here. Start off just going through super quick. We got obviously Alabama. Alabama's been at number 1 for a very long time, and same with Notre Dame. These have really remained unchanged, these top 5 teams between Alabama, Notre Dame, Clemson, Ohio State, Texas A&M. But Iowa State now gets to move up 1 spot after Florida ended up having their game when we all know who threw the shoe and basically cost himself the game against a very bad LSU team. And then Georgia is back up 1 spot after, I guess, winning a game against Missouri. I guess that's even that, if that's even big. And Cincinnati didn't even play and they drop 1 game, or they drop 1 spot. Sorry, they're still undefeated at spot number 9. And then spot number 10, we have Oklahoma finally making it back up to the top 10. So there's our top 10. You continue with the rest of the rankings.
Of course, and the rest of the top 25, there's not much interesting happening now. Like, all the attention's really on the top 10, with it being a conference championship weekend and then the bowl games. So I'll just briefly run through it. 11 through 15, you got Indiana, Coastal Carolina, still undefeated. USC, also still undefeated at 5-0. Northwestern, no change. And North Carolina, after thrashing the crap out of Miami. And 16 through 20, you have Iowa, the Mormons from BYU, Miami, who dropped 8 spots after losing to North Carolina. You got Louisiana Raging Cajuns and the Texas Longhorns. And to round out the top 25, we have Oklahoma State, North Carolina State, Tulsa, San Jose State, and Colorado.
Yep. So basically, there besides that Miami North Carolina game, there has not been pretty much that much big change in these top 25 college football rankings that they've had. There's been not much big games, but this weekend is definitely going to cause some changing in the rankings after all these big teams are forced to go up against each other in these conference championship games. Once again, we'll wait until then, because for now we're going to be starting off with, basically, we're going to be focusing more on the top 10-ish of these rankings, because somebody named Drew has a few issues about about these rankings so far. So, Drew, what are your thoughts on these college football rankings?
Yes, I do, Ethan. And with it being so close to the final rankings and with it being conference championship weekend, I have a few problems with the way that the committee did their rankings, especially the top 10. And there are a couple teams which I believe just should not be there. And these rankings, they're very, very bad. I mean, the first team that I look at is Iowa State. They moved up 1 spot from number 7 to number 6. They're 8-2 on the season, but they're a great team. They're one of the hottest teams in the nation. But I don't believe that they should be as high as they are, because they had their opening game, they lost to Louisiana, who's 9-1. Now, granted, they're a very good team, but it's almost like the College Football Playoff Committee has just forgotten about that loss. And it's like, there has to be something here. And granted that they are a 2-loss team, their other loss was to Oklahoma State by a field goal. I mean, they're just not a good enough team to be number 6, in my opinion. And granted, they do have notable wins versus Texas and Oklahoma, which they do get another rematch against Oklahoma in the Big 12 championship. More on that later. I just don't think they merit the number 6 spot. I mean, I had a 2-loss team like Georgia going up to the number 6 spot, because Georgia has notable wins against, like, their losses are to Alabama and Florida, 2 top 10 teams, and they have notable wins against teams like Auburn, Missouri, like very, very good teams. Like the next team that I have an issue with, also in the SEC, is Florida at number 7. And this one is even more mind-boggling than Iowa State at number 6, because they're a 2-loss team. They only moved down 1 spot after a horrible, horrendous loss against LSU, where essentially it was their game to lose. Like they had LSU on the ropes, and then they quite literally threw it away. And other polls like the AP poll and the coaches poll and myself thought that they were going to drop 5 spots, like be knocked out of the top 10. But they only dropped 1 spot. And like, especially in the college football playoff selection show, like all the analysts expected there to be more of a punishment for Florida for losing in such a bad game. And like, that sets an interesting precedent for, teams like Clemson, say they lose this weekend. Like it just creates chaos, and I don't quite understand it. And like the next thing that I don't understand is the Cincinnati Bearcats at number 9. Like they haven't been on the field in 2-3 weeks, but it's almost like they've been penalized for not playing games, as to where teams like Ohio State have only played 5 games. They've stayed in the top 4 all season, to which it's like, I don't understand, where it's like you're setting like, okay, the way I explain it is the college football committee values teams like Alabama, Clemson, and Ohio State higher than all others. And whether it's right or wrong, like there is an elitism value there for those top premier programs in America. And if I'm Cincinnati, I am upset. I am not happy. Like the president of the American Conference, he went out and said that he wasn't happy. And quite frankly, I agree with him. Cincinnati has just been hosed. And it's like, some teams get penalized for not playing games and other teams don't? I don't understand. And it's like the little guys that are not Power 5 are just getting the end of the shaft.
It is just unbelievable. I mean, I am 100% in the same with you. It's just like, why? Like, it's any person with logic seeing Ohio State at number 4 right now with 5. What is it? They're 5-0. Congrats, you're undefeated. But you've only played 5
granted,
games.
They're a great team, but like the way they've been playing, it's like if you're gonna penalize Cincinnati for not playing games, why don't you penalize Ohio State for not playing games?
Drop them to the
especially in this year, scheduling and COVID concerns, like with other teams, nobody has any control over that. So in my opinion, like if you're not going to penalize Ohio State, fine, but don't penalize the Bearcats, who in all honesty have had a very, very good year. Like sure, they don't have any top 25 wins, but they have 4 wins over teams that are 6-3 or better. So their resume, it's pretty strong. And if they win against Tulsa in the conference championship game, like their chances at the college football playoff should be much higher than it is right now.
It's just the whole like for me
system.
It is a flawed system and a half. There's never been an opportunity for teams like Cincinnati, for other teams that like one of them I'll eventually get to even make the playoffs in the first place because of these teams. These teams that are up there, they could lose 2 to 3 times and still have a better chance to make it over Cincinnati, despite Cincinnati never winning a game. Cincinnati's been trying to I've heard some thoughts about Cincinnati trying to schedule a game against Ohio State to prove that they can play. Why not give these guys an opportunity to prove themselves? They don't. They end up getting blown out. They end up getting blown out. But for those people who make those arguments, if Cincinnati makes this college football playoffs, they'll get blown out. Well, we've seen in years past that when teams like Ohio State or like another random team, when they go up against like an Alabama in these playoffs, they get blown out in the first round. So why the heck are they getting the opportunity to get blown out when they don't deserve it, when there could be a better opportunity for a team that's like an unsung team like Cincinnati to make it? It just makes no sense. And it's kind of disheartening to these teams that are putting all their effort in all season long to quote unquote try and be the best team in football, but they've to begin with, they've never had the opportunity to because they never were given the chance, which is just unfair. And it's supposed to be a fair equality going around college football, yay. But as college football, like the way that everything has been scheduled, it's flawed. It needs to be fixed for as a fan or is like a person who is more of an outsider of it looking in. If they're looking to make it things more fair and giving everyone a fair opportunity, make it so that just change how the playoffs are. I don't think it's that hard, but the people who are against it are not being very logical because it's not the people who are against it are most likely the Alabama, the Clemson, the Ohio State fans, because they're the ones that enjoy making the college football playoffs every year, where everyone else is stuck with their, yeah, you made a FedEx Bowl. You get to go up again and versus Florida. Congrats. Great season. Yay.
Yeah.
Like,
So, I mean,
no
essentially what we're saying is that the little guys like Cincinnati and Ethan, a team that you've been really pulling for all year, the Coastal Carolina Chanticleers, go Chants, they don't essentially get the same opportunities as those bigger and more elite programs.
Mm-hmm. It's just unfair. And then going with Coastal Carolina too. Coastal Carolina is 11-0, 11-0, and we're looking at other teams like Ohio State, who's only played 5 games, and Coastal Carolina has done everything in their power. They played anybody they can. They played BYU. BYU's not even like nowhere near them, but they decided let's schedule a game against each other. When in my opinion, one of the greatest games ever, the Mullets versus the Mormons. Amazing game, and actually it was worth watching. It was a fun game because it came all the way down to the wire.
Very fun game. I
And
enjoyed it.
it's one of the best games that we've seen all season. So why don't why doesn't a team like Coastal Carolina even get to be deserved for a top 10 spot? They're not even in the top 10. There's teams with 2 losses that have also played only around like 8 games, and they're in the top 10, but you're not even getting any recognition to Coastal Carolina just because they're in the Sun Belt. Oh, just because they're in a smaller conference. Well, they're beating bigger teams. They're beating these big bad teams. Why not we see anything else? Well, we'll get to see because I mean, Coastal Carolina does get to go up against Louisiana. If they do up winning, do they deserve a top 10 spot? I 100% believe so. They do, because that's another team or ranked team that they've beaten, and they would have gone 12-0. What else could they have done to have a chance to even make the college football playoffs? Who knows? They probably have like a 0.0% chance to even make it in the first place. But I just think it's very unfair for my bandwagon Chanticleer fan myself.
Well, Ethan, as a bandwagon Chanticleer fan, I mean, just like I'm gonna tell you to pump the brakes here a little bit on your, like, yes, it is a shame that Coastal Carolina doesn't get a chance to represent the college football playoff. I mean, I didn't think they were going to anyway. Their schedule, their resume just wasn't strong enough. Although their win against BYU was very impressive. And if they do beat Louisiana again, I do think they're worthy of a top 10 spot and a New Year's Six Bowl, which this would be the best year in the history of the Sun Belt Conference. So although Coastal Carolina doesn't really get a chance to play in the playoff, we do think their special season and this historic run, it deserves recognition and it deserves appreciation because it doesn't exactly happen every day.
You know, everyone loves Cinderella runs, and this year it's really been a Cinderella run for this Coastal Carolina team. So I'm just really hoping that they have at least an opportunity to make it into the top 10 at least. I'd be happy with a top 10 spot because I know it's most likely impossible for them to make the college football playoffs, but at the very least, give them the top 10 recognition. I mean, there's gonna be tons of teams losing this weekend anyway, or top 10 teams losing this weekend because there's a lot of 2 versus 3, 1 versus 7 teams that are gonna be going up against each other. So maybe drop one of those teams out of the playoffs. But knowing the college football rankings, the best the Coastal Carolina, best the Chanticleers will probably get is 11. So
but that's okay. Mm-hmm. But given that the bigger teams, it is conference championship weekend, this weekend has a chance to be very, very interesting in terms of the shakeup of the college football playoffs. And with all these high profile teams like squaring off, I mean, it could be a fun weekend. And we're going to go through the bigger games and even some of the smaller games that could impact the playoffs going forward.
Now we'll just start off with some of the smaller ones. We'll just briefly go through these because these are the games, I guess, like kind of like my Chanticleers. They're the Pac-12, the American, and the Sun Belt. Those are the 3 conferences that are, I mean, Pac-12 is top 5, but they don't really have a team that is really good enough to make the college football playoffs. It'll just be a game between USC and Washington. Oh, wait, they got COVID. So it's actually USC versus Oregon because Washington didn't, or is it their players had COVID? They didn't have the opportunity to play. And guess what? Oregon will take advantage of it for not clinching a Pac-12 a championship berth and still making the Pac-12 championship for like the first time ever, I think, in history. So I think that's pretty ironic. But their games is going to be, I guess, like a fun one to watch. USC, we'll see if they could continue their run in this. Maybe they'll be the team that goes and steals Coastal Carolina's 10th spot. But and then we'll move on to, obviously we talked a little bit with the Coastal Carolina. I mean, they are up against Louisiana. That's another huge game for Coastal Carolina's sake.
It's also a rematch.
Yeah, it is also a rematch from, I believe, earlier in the season when the two.
Yeah, Coastal Carolina knocked off the Louisiana Raging Cajuns. That is Louisiana's lone loss on the season, on what has been a rather impressive season for Louisiana as well. So Louisiana gets an opportunity to rematch Coastal for the Sun Belt crown.
Yep, and then moving on to the American. This is, I believe, Cincinnati versus
Cincinnati and Tulsa.
Tulsa, yeah. So again, two top 25 teams going at it. Another fun game that'll be interesting to watch. And this is a huge game for Cincinnati because if they lose, basically all their hopes and dreams of trying to stay in that top 25 and trying to prove all the haters wrong will be gone. So they're looking for a statement win against Tulsa. So now we're moving on to the more impactful games because these are teams that are the divisions, or excuse me, conferences that have teams in the top 10 that do have a chance to make the college football playoffs. So we'll start off with the whole ACC.
Can I take this one?
Yeah,
Miami fan, ACC,
right,
that's my conference. And in my opinion, I think this can be the most interesting and most fun game in terms of college football playoff implications, because we have a rematch of earlier in the season, Notre Dame and Clemson. Earlier in the year, Clemson lost at Notre Dame without Trevor Lawrence. Trevor Lawrence is out with COVID. But now they're both top 4 teams, and I don't think that's ever happened. 2 teams that high playing a conference championship game. It's a rematch with serious playoff implications. And what's interesting here is that Notre Dame has pretty much locked up a spot. I believe that if Notre Dame loses, then both Notre Dame and Clemson are in. Clemson potentially jumps Notre Dame back into that number 2 spot. But God forbid, if Notre Dame happens to upset Clemson, that is where the fun begins, because that would open up some unprecedented opportunities where they could potentially be knocked out of the top 4, or they can drop down a spot where a 2-loss team has never been let into the playoff. But with a team as good as Clemson, I know Dabo Swinney has no concerns that they'll be out if they lose, but it could be very interesting. Maybe Clemson drops to number 4, or it gives a chance like Texas A&M to sneak into that number 4 spot. I think if Clemson loses this weekend, things can get very, very interesting.
I think the biggest issue for Clemson, or basically the only thing they have to worry about, is don't get blown out. If they don't get blown out, if they win, or if they win and keep it close, they're pretty much in, because I know Clemson's too good of a team, like you said, to miss out on. So I think if they, as long as they keep it a game, they'll probably be in it. It'll be definitely interesting to see if they do end up like losing by like 10 to or even like 13 points, because that really could cost them and start giving some hope to these Texas A&M and Iowa State teams that are at 5 and 6. So with that, we'll move on to the SEC, which that is another bigger game, because that is Alabama, I believe, against Florida.
Alabama and Florida.
Yes, 1 versus 7.
The Mercedes-Benz Dome at Atlanta, Georgia. See, the thing is, Bama, like Notre Dame, they're undefeated. I don't think a loss here to Florida will really ruin their chances of making it. If they win like they're favored to, they're a lock. I think they're a lock the whole way anyway. But then there's the Florida conundrum. And Florida, to me, theoretically should have had their chances ruined by that LSU loss. But however, because they only dropped 1 spot, there's a tiny, tiny sliver of hope for them to get in if they somehow beat Alabama. Now they'll need a little bit of help from the guys above them, but I mean, the door's still open for Florida. And like I said before, a 2-loss team has never been let in. But then again, an SEC champion has never been left out. So if Florida wins, that'll be another crazy scenario. And another playoff game, like a conference championship that has big implications, is Ohio State and Northwestern. Now, Ohio State, the rules were bended a little bit for them to get in, but Ohio State, yeah, right. They need Indiana fans. I know they feel a little bit robbed, but it's fine. You get the best teams playing, and we understand that. But it should be a very good game. And Ohio State, basically, if they win, they're in. But if they don't, if Northwestern can upset them, that'll also allow open the door for some smaller teams to get in.
Mm-hmm. I think that's going to be more interesting because Ohio State hasn't played in a long time. I mean, they did they play last week, right? I think they did. Again.
No, they didn't.
They didn't. So they've had issues with playing games, especially since they've only played 5 games all season, with all these different breaks compared to Northwestern, who's been playing consistently all season long. Will that give them the advantage? I think maybe so. I think it'll be a lot closer game because if Indiana was able to keep it a close game as they basically as they did, I think that Northwestern can too. Northwestern's only loss does come against Michigan State, which was a kind of in my opinion, a dud for, or one of those I guess those, or fluke. Sorry, that's what I meant. It's a fluke for Michigan State in that game, and just a bad game. Northwestern played all game, but I think since then Northwestern's defense has been one of the best in the Big Ten, and I feel like that is going to really basically cause some problems with Justin Fields, who struggled against some of the better defenses like Indiana when he did in that game. So I think it's definitely going to be a close one. I'm all in for the shit shows, and let's see what happens if one of these top 4 teams do end up losing, because that just causes more havoc for the committee and for all the fans trying to see which team's going to get in, which team doesn't. So I'm all for that, and with that, we'll probably move. We'll
move to our final, conference championship game. Mm-hmm. And I almost thought you forgot about them, like most people do nationally. Most people kind of dismiss the Big 12, but the Big 12 championship game, it's an interesting one. You have number 6 Iowa State versus Oklahoma, another rematch where Iowa State beat Oklahoma earlier in the year, but Oklahoma has then gone off to rattle 6 straight, and they're looking really good. So I believe this game could be interesting if Oklahoma could win. But Iowa State, what they need to do is they need to take care of business, and hopefully they can jump Texas A&M and have one of the bigger guys up top lose. So that game, although it doesn't directly affect the CFP, but one of those teams can definitely sneak in given the havoc above them. So as a fan, myself, like Ethan said, I'm rooting for upsets. I'm rooting for Notre Dame to win, Northwestern to win. I'm rooting for Florida to win, because bring on the chaos. And with as bad as the rankings and the committee has been thus far, that would just be so 2020. If just everything just absolutely fell apart. And that's just what I'm rooting for.
Could you imagine a world where 3 of the 4 teams lose basically in one day? So all these teams are playing on the same week or same day. So definitely a game to keep an eye on. I mean, I do, as like I said, as a fan who doesn't pay attention as much to the Big 12, I was one of the few people who was like, what the heck, Iowa State's number 6? Why are they number 6? I'm like, what have they done all season long? But I have finally checked their resume, and they have been playing well, and they have been one of the hottest teams in the entire college football. And I think that's why they're so high in the rankings, whether we like it or not, I guess. Well, we'll have to see. This committee is, I still think there's teams that should be above them, but that's just the committee's decisions to be putting them there. And if for Iowa State to have any sort of hope, they just have to win. And like you said, they have to win soundly. So I feel like if the shit hits the fan, then I think it'll be definitely interesting. But until then, we'll just have to sit back and keep on cheering for the underdogs. Go Northwestern, go Notre Dame, go Florida. Let's bring it on. Bring on the chaos.
Of course.
Well, that's probably going to conclude our kind of preview to the college football conference championship games and the college football, basically in our opinions about the rankings and how we don't think they're really correct. I think a lot of other fans of college football too do not think they are correct, but that's excluding the Ohio State, Alabama, and Clemson fans.
Yeah, well, they're always in, so
they're always in, so they're just spoiled. But that's besides the point. I think that's going to conclude this episode of Just Talking About Sports. I hope everyone has enjoyed a new college football talk for first time on the channel. Hopefully you guys like it, and maybe we'll have to continue this more when the playoffs actually get started, and that's when
I know I want to.
He really chooses. Oh well, but until then, we'll just be sitting here until next time, just talking about sports.